Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. So nice to see many of you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We're going to start with an invocation, which we observe by a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Haney Keith.
Here.
Nash.
Here.
Stead.
Here.
Willetts.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Next up, we've got minutes from December 5th for approval.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the city council minutes for the work session and the evening session on December 5th, 2023.
Second.
Motion a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Here.
Nash.
Yes.
Yes.
Stead.
Yes.
Willetts.
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, we're going to move into special business. Is John Edwards here? All right, let us know if you're online. We are reappointing John Edwards to the Electrical Code Board for a 4-year term. I want to thank John for his current service and willingness to continue to serve in this capacity. Yes.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that John Edwards be appointed to the Electrical Code Board for a 4-year term ending December 2027.
Without objection. Well, again, thank you, John. You were official. Now we will head to CAR 23-9 and the PUD 2310 revised findings.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'm going to recuse from voting on this item.
All right. Is Sabrina here?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I apologize that I'm not able to be there in person this evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you great. Thanks.
Great. Okay. As you may recall, on August 14th, 2023, City Council heard a request for a rezone of the property located at 11880 Overland Road from R1A to R3D. An appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the associated planned unit development comprised of 138 multifamily units was also included. At that hearing, council denied the appeal of the PUD, approved the rezone, and instructed the planning team to return with revised findings, which have been included in your packets this evening. If the council agrees with the new findings, then a motion would be needed to adopt them. Thank you.
All right.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the revised findings.
Second.
We have a motion, a second discussion.
Madam Mayor, I looked through all the revised findings that were sent over. I was here when we had that very, very in-depth discussion. I think that this captured the discussion really well, and I appreciate the staff taking the time to put that all into a condensed version.
All right, thank you, clerk.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Haney Keith.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Willetts.
No.
Agent.
Yes.
4 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Next up, we have the acceptance of the Canvas 2023 election results. Jamie Heiserling, welcome.
Madam Mayor, council members, thank you for having me this evening. For the record, my name is Jamie Heinzerling, and I am the Deputy City Clerk for the City of Boise. I am here today to present the certified Boise City Municipal election results from the Ada County Clerk's Office as required by Idaho Code 50-412. The Ada County Commissioners, acting as the Board of Canvassers of Election, canvassed the results of the election that took place on November 7th, 2023. The general election results were certified by Ada County and received in hard copy by the Boise City Clerk's Office on November 28th, 2023. The election results were included on today's council agenda and will subsequently be entered into the minutes of today's City Council proceedings in summary and by precinct. I would like to note that the election for Boise City Council seats District 1, and District 6 did not appear on the ballot as council members Halliburton and Willetts were unopposed in their district races. Per Idaho Code 50-4052A, no election shall be held for unopposed mayoral and city council seat races. Additionally, Idaho Code Section 50-4052B requires the city clerk to declare such unopposed candidates elected. This declaration was prepared and presented to council during the September 26, 2023 council meeting, which declared council members Halliburton and Willetts elected for the city council districts 1 and 6 respectively. As such, there are no election results for District 1 and District 6 included in the canvassed results of election. There is no needed action by the council this evening for this item. It is informational only and being read into the record per Idaho Code. And I can stand for any questions. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, no questions. And I, like you said, no motion needed, but I appreciate the presentation and appreciate all the work that was put into pulling these all together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to move into the interim budget changes from Eric. And then it is likely after this that we will take a 15-minute recess. We need to head back into our chambers after this. I think we'll hear from you. And then Mike, if you think yours is going to be a full 20 minutes. Okay, we'll see what time it is when you finish.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. We have 10 interim budget changes for you this evening for your consideration. 5 of those interim budget changes are related to the closeout of fiscal year 2023. The other 5 are fiscal year 24 items that would fall within our normal interim budget change schedule. We'll start with the 5 regular fiscal year 24 items. The first item is a $4,548 transfer from the Heritage Fund to the Open Space and Clean Water Levy Fund to address cost overruns on the trail accessibility project that was approved by the City Council in September of 2022. This project has been completed, but it went over budget slightly due to increased costs. This adjustment will align the budget with the actual costs using unallocated funds in the Heritage Fund. Our second item is a $2.1 million budget neutral project in the Open Space and Clean Water Levy Fund for a linear park and pathway along West Goddard Road. This project, which was approved by the Open Space and Clean Water Advisory Board on December 6, 2023, is adjacent to the Settlers Canal and across the street from Capitol High School, and on property donated to the city by the Settlers Irrigation District in summer of 2022. Our third item is a $175,000 reduction in the Planning and Development Services Department, as $175,000 was advanced from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2023 for the zoning code alignment work earlier this calendar year. This adjustment will remove the $175,000 in funding from fiscal year 24, as this project was already accounted for in 2023. Our fourth item is a $200,000 increase for a police facilities planning study, utilizing funding from the Project Portfolio Fund. This project would represent a collaboration between the Police Department and the Public Works Department, and aims to ensure that the police department's needs are met in light of growth, and also to ensure citizens have access to police services into the future. This project would inform strategic capital and operating budget needs necessary for growth. Fifth, we have a $25,000 investment for historic streetlight replacements. The fiscal year 2024 adopted budget included funding for the replacement of 15 historic streetlight poles on Warm Springs Avenue that are approximately 100 years old. Bids came in higher than anticipated, and this $25,000 increase is required to ensure that the project can be advanced. Our second half, our last 5 items are related to closeout funds from fiscal year 2023. Mike will be going over our end of year report in a few moments. The first recommendation is a $100,000 investment towards graffiti abatement. When the city council approved the new graffiti abatement ordinance in September of 2023, staff proposed returning to the city council as part of the end of year process with a $100,000 funding allocation to support the removal of graffiti via the existing compliance process. This funding would allow staff to launch the program in fiscal year 2024 and later return to the council with updates and funding, summary of funding usage, as well as a summary of the need for any program adjustments going forward. The second closeout item would represent a $900,000 one-time investment for fiscal year 2025 budget initiatives. As part of the annual budget process, certain one-time investments are usually included. For example, over the past 2 years, a property tax rebate program has been included as part of our annual budget process. This $900,000 will be housed in the operating contingency for one-time uses as part of the fiscal year 2025 budget process. Our third item would reduce our fiscal year 2024 sales tax revenue estimate. This decrease is in response to lower than anticipated collections during fiscal year 2023, under the assumption that we'll once again be capped at 1% growth in fiscal year 2024 based on the state's distribution formula. Our fourth item is a $250,000 transfer from the general fund to the capital fund to be allocated towards various major repair and maintenance projects, primarily within City Hall. And our final item is a $2 million transfer from the general fund to the capital fund to go towards the capital fund facilities reserve, which is used to accommodate known needs that are still in the planning phase, such as police facilities, pools, and libraries. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions that the council might have.
Madam Mayor. Eric, remind me, in the current budget, we had put a line item for these future capital projects. What is that currently? I mean, I'm thrilled that we're putting $2 million in here, but remind me how much we'll have once we do that.
Thank you for that question, council member. It's a bit of a moving target as it moves throughout the year, but we allocated approximately $5 million as part of the fiscal year 24 budget for that.
Super, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the 10 items on the interim budget change.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I mean, this all looks good to me. I'm glad that we're investing in some of these areas. As we talk about the budget next year, I think it'd be really helpful for us to get an update on the Pathways program and where we want to grow that. Because I see that, we're obviously putting it as part of the park here, but I know that there's lots of folks who would like it everywhere. So that would be really helpful.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, 15 minutes. And then, folks, we're going to recess probably for 15 minutes. You don't want to have a public hearing with us not having had dinner, and dinner did not arrive. So it's been waiting for us. So we'll take 15 minutes for this, but then we're going to take a quick recess so people can eat, and then we'll be back in at 6:45-ish.
Madam Mayor, council members, my name is Mike Schrack. I work in the budget office. And as Eric said, we have the end of year report now to present to you. I have a few slides to go through some highlights. You should have received an electronic version of this in your meeting packet. There is a picture of the cover, someone fishing on the river. I'm going to briefly cover the general fund results, then talk to some enterprise funds and other funds briefly, and also touch on some economic indicators. For fiscal year 2023, there was an income statement variance of minus 4.8 million, meaning expenses exceeded revenues. No need to be alarmed. This was planned. We expected this. And there are balance sheet adjustments that the report goes through on page 10 that lead to a positive $3.6 million result. And this is what Eric just talked to with some of the interim budget changes on how that money gets redeployed. The revenue categories were 2.1 million, a little less than 1% below budget. I have a slide later with some detail. And then on the expense side, we had significant expense savings of 32 million. And this is what we have been seeing largely due to just supply shortages, delays getting, projects completed and such. And we end up rebudgeting a lot of this expense. But the M&O savings do include unused contingency amounts. And again, I have detail on a later slide. We have some personnel savings. They were reduced by the new public safety labor agreements. And then I mentioned the supply shortages is frequently still causing delays in projects, just takes longer to get some things done. And then also we knew there were savings in fiscal year 2023. So we pre-planned 6.6 million of those to use in the fiscal year 2024 budget. This graph shows the results of what we've been working on the last 3 years, just trying to end the year where we redeploy resources sooner rather than end the year with a larger surplus amount, unallocated amount. And over on the right is 1.1%. That's if we take the 3.6 million divided by our revenues, that is where we're landing the plane, so to speak, when we come in at year end. So we made progress there during the year with redeploying funds. So for general fund revenues, several revenues stand out as being above budget. One is departmental revenue, 3.6 million. About half of this is in parks, user fees. Programs are doing very well in parks. We're past the pandemic. Kids and adults are back into programs, and so that's good to see. Part of that is also in public safety. Higher costs does come back in higher revenue when we basically other areas, other agencies use our departments. Franchise fees were up over budget 1.4 million, largely due to natural gas. Prices were higher. Some of that is likely growth. Water franchise revenue was also up. Sales tax exceeded budget, 800,000. The story here is that sales tax has gone from double-digit increases a year or so ago to basically flat now. And the last 2 quarters, we actually had a little bit of a shared loss. Not a lot. We got most of the growth we got a year ago, but we did not get our 1% the last 2 quarters. But nonetheless, we were above budget and we did have all that growth back in fiscal year 2022. And last above budget is development fees, about 600,000 above budget. But a similar story as sales tax there. This is 2.3 million below a year ago. Things are slower in development construction, but we did reach our budget. Then revenues below budget. Other revenue is the one that stands out there. This is largely due to the timing of grants for our ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act projects. That's the driver there. Our interest income was above budgets, 1.2 million. We also had some opioid settlement funding, which was a positive variance. So there's how we get to the 2.1 million below budget. If there are any questions on revenues, I'd be happy to take those now or when I'm done. So on general fund expenses, our personnel came in about 600,000 below budget, just slightly. We do still have a higher vacancy level. You can see in the first bullet point, our main salaries line, 2.1 million of savings, healthcare 1.4 million. And again, the story here is that we had other things going on, one being the new labor contracts, which we didn't have budgeted as high as they were. So there are some additional costs that went out there. We're still experiencing higher overtime, largely in police, and our other pay and retirement costs also exceeded budget. One of those items is constant staffing and fire, which is similar to overtime. And then retirement costs, those go up as well with some of the higher costs in the labor contracts. We did have significant vacancies pre-planned into the budget, so we were actively working to redeploy funds as we had them available. And then switching to maintenance and operations expenses, we were 16 million below budget. And that some of the main components were operating contingencies, 6.5 million, professional services, 4.5 million, minor equipment, 3.5 million, and then smaller amounts for contracting, miscellaneous costs, and software maintenance. And this kind of leads us into some of the rebudget language, because a lot of those costs do get rebudgeted. Just projects that were started, but we couldn't complete. And so that's why we have the underspend, and then we do rebudget it. So moving down to now miscellaneous expenses, this is where we have grants. We were 16.8 million below budget there in grants. And like the revenues for the American Rescue Plan Act, we also were below in expenses. The two go close together when we spend those funds. So 9.8 million there, 6.8 million of VRT grant costs, 6 million, which is for State Street. And then last, our transfers out shows a negative variance, and that was just an unbudgeted year-end transfer to the Ice World and Gulf Reserves, which we do every year. So out of our expense savings, we do have the expense rebudgets, including encumbrances of nearly 28 million. Moving on to the enterprise funds, a few bullet points on airport. Revenue is very high there, far above budget. We set the 23 budget before air traffic had really kicked back into high gear. And so that's one reason that that number was far above budget. And it hit user fees, grant revenue, capital revenue, everything was higher. Operating expenditures were slightly below budget, about 4%. And our capital project expense for the year was 56 million. On geothermal, revenue there was slightly over budget. Water sales were 200,000, about 30% above budget. It was a colder than average year, and we've got new connections and some higher usage. So it was a good year for revenue in the geothermal fund. Operating costs were below budget. There's some vacancy, and we're having much less in the way of repairs needed because we've been replacing some things, been more proactive. So that was good. And we did use 1.4 million of ARPA funding there to do a 10th Street pipe replacement project. In the solid waste fund, total revenue was 1.8 million above budget. Some of that was service revenues, and then also just some interest income are the main drivers there. Operating expenditures were slightly below budget due to some M&O costs. And then water renewal, total revenue there was below budget. Service revenues were quite close, within $500,000 of the budget, but other revenue was lower due to change in a project we viewed as a grant. And we had some offsetting things like interest income, but that is where the variance is for water renewal, and we're slightly below budget. Operating expenditures were significantly below budget, and what we have there is personnel was actually a little bit over budget, and it just due to a pension liability adjustment, we have taken that fund at year end. And then most of the variance, nearly all of it, is in maintenance and operations costs. With multi-year capital projects, there's planning, there's support, there's some cost movement between capital projects and operating expenses. And that is what's driving a large variance there. There's some rebudgets, there's some scope changes, but that is what is behind that large underspend there. And then capital and major equipment totaled 29 million in that fund. Risk management and workers' comp. Revenue was slightly above budget due to investments. Expenditures were 1.2 million above budget. We're seeing higher insurance costs, particularly estimated liability claims. We continue to see a higher level of claims than we have in prior years. And then the last fund I'll cover here is the capital fund. Revenues of 35 million were about 21 million under budget. This is largely driven by timing of projects, and most of that is recommended for rebudget into 2024. And on the expense side, it's a similar story. We're well below the budget with 45 million spent on a budget of 132 million, but most all of that is recommended for rebudget. A lot of that is encumbered in projects. Are making progress. It's just taking longer with some things. And the last bullet point is on that very point, that just project delays. We still have some supply issues. Shortages of labor now is a big one. And that does increase costs and takes longer to get projects done. So we don't spend our budget and then we rebudget. So that's kind of what's going on there. Then my last slide is just quick hitters on some economic indicators. If we look at employment or unemployment, the first bullet, going back a year ago, we were at 2.1% in September, or when the fiscal year began in October 1. This year, we're at 2.7%. It's still a good job market, but unemployment is a little higher. We had solid job growth of 3.4% during the year in Boise. And then there is just generally in the economy some ongoing improvement in labor force participation. We're still not quite back to pre-pandemic level, but we're getting closer. Construction development, this is related to the development fees, where I said earlier we hit our budget, but there you can see the annual permit volume was down almost 18% from a year ago. We still have lots of big projects. We're still busy, but things are slower than they were. And our revenue again was down 2.3 million, about 13% from the record levels set last year. And then sales tax, I already touched on this earlier as well. Our revenue declined slightly. We still did get most all the growth we got a year ago, but that's, again, we went from very high growth to flat growth, and even a little bit of erosion in quarterly growth. And then last, airport passenger traffic is up 10% during the fiscal year. So lots going on there with growth. So that was quick. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. My question was about the opioid settlement funds. Are those in our general fund? Are they being tracked separately? How do we receive those?
Okay. Madam Mayor, Council Member, I believe we have those in the general fund and came in as technically restitution. And then we have those reserved for specified use.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We are going to recess. We're going to aim for 15 minutes. We'll be back. All right, we will go ahead and pick up with the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There's no separate discussion on these unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney-Keith,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And now we're going to move into ordinances. We've got one on first reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 45-23, an ordinance describing the exterior boundaries and annexing, incorporating the remainder of properties on the Ustick Ditch lateral into the Boise Municipal Irrigation System. Directing the Boise City Clerk to report a certified copy of this ordinance in the office of the Ada County Recorder and providing an effective date.
And now second reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on the second reading calendar be read by number and title only and filed for the third reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 44-23, an ordinance enacting a new chapter 20 to title 3 Boise City Code entitled Film Permits. Under such new chapter, providing the legal authority, purpose, and scope for film permits, setting forth that the general licensing provisions are applicable, providing definitions, setting forth when film permits are required and the exemptions therefrom, setting forth requirements for exempt/non-commercial filming activities and prohibiting filming without a permit if one is required, providing application standards, requirements, and ongoing duty, setting forth the fees, surety bond, permit term, and non-transferability of film permits, providing for the administration, application review and conditions, and requests for permit changes, requiring a code of conduct, requiring applicants follow liability provision requirements, setting forth permit denial, suspension, and revocation review procedures and reasons, and providing violations and penalties provisions, approving and subbing the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thanks. And now third reading.
Madam Mayor, I move that further reading of ordinance 42-23 be dispensed with and the record reflect that it has been read the third time in full.
Second.
Motion and second, clerk?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD 42-23, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title 10, Chapter 5, Section 10-5-7 to amend local limits and Section 10-5-19 to add a new subsection 10-5-19-1 on electronic reporting and renumber the remaining subsections accordingly, approving a summary of the ordinance and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor, I move that ordinance 42-23 be approved.
Second.
A motion and second, clerk?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Now we will move into the public hearings. First up, we've got the Boise Airport Public Parking Garage rate increase. Hello. So is anybody here for this? All right. Sean is here from the airport to present and see if we've got any questions for you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm Sean Briggs, Deputy Director of Parking and Landside Facilities at the Boise Airport. I understand our Director Hupp was here last week, and just give a quick recap on the proposal we're asking for the rate increase for the parking facilities. Little background, the East Parking Garage was opened in August this year, and that added a little over 1,100 spaces to our parking inventory at the Boise Airport, increasing our parking capacity by 50% close in. Since that has been operating, we've noticed that the main parking garage have received extra usage or is more popular with our passengers compared to the East Garage. And we're looking to differentiate the two products. While both offer a good opportunity for our passengers to park close to the airport, there is more convenience with the main garage due to proximity closer to the terminal and access to the airport on both the first and second level of that facility. So our proposal would be to request to increase the rate of the long-term parking of the main garage by $3, moving it from $17 to $20 per day, and increasing our long-term surface parking by $1 per day from $14 to $15. The long-term surface or the long-term parking in our two garage operations would be differentiated between 17 in the East Garage and 20 in the main garage. And we believe this will better spread demand across our parking facilities. Thank you, and I stand for any questions you may have.
All right, doesn't look like any questions. We will,
Thanks.
I believe we take a motion, correct?
Yep.
It's,
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve
Yes.
resolution.
we didn't do the public hearing.
No, we did.
I checked with the audience. There's nobody here, so we can have the record reflect that one more time. And there were no questions. All right, public hearing is closed.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of resolution 720-23.
Second.
We have a motion and second discussion.
Madam Mayor, last week we got a long presentation from our airport director, a very thorough presentation, really explaining why these changes needed to happen, the reasons behind it. Got a great review of that today. I think it makes sense. And so that's why I made the motion to approve.
All right, clerk.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, now we'll move into the second item, SUB 23-7. We've got Jesse Lyle here. Hey, Jesse. The applicant, Centurion B&A Engineers. Hi. All righty, and then do we have the Neighborhood Association here? We don't expect them to be here. Anybody from the public? Anybody online? Okay.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. The item before you is SUB 23-7,
a preliminary plat for 1 common and 7 buildable lots located at 7605 Bogart Lane on 1.13 acres in the R1C zone. On October 9th, 2023, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved a PUD for 7 detached single-family homes and recommended approval for the Carver Landing subdivision preliminary plat as shown on the screen. The home and lot on the east side outlined in red is existing and proposed to remain. The lots outlined in green on the west side, front Ferris Avenue, while the lots outlined in blue, front Dempsey Street. The 6 new buildable lots will take vehicular access from the alley-like common lot outlined in yellow. The PUD was utilized for reduced lot sizes and setbacks, and the applicant is proposing to maintain the existing attached sidewalk and add street trees. They would also provide additional tree mitigation as required. And in conclusion, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right. For the applicant, are you in agreement with terms and conditions of the report? All right, the record will reflect that. Want to make sure nobody is here for this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this one.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve SUB 23-7.
Yeah, second.
Any discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I appreciate that applicant's effort to mitigate the impact with the landscaping on the south side. I think that will be important to the area, so I appreciate that effort. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Clerk?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right. Next up, we've got an appeal at 2219 Kootenai Street, PUD 2325. Welcome, Matt. We've got Matt Dennis from the city. Stacy Donahue? Did I still? Stacy? Yes. All right, that's fine. So are both of you speaking? Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you. And then applicant Ben, I saw, there you are. Ben Semple is here. Jeff, great. Is Depot Bench here? Anybody here to testify on this? Anybody online? Okay, so we will hear from staff, then we will hear from the appellant, then we'll hear from the applicant. And that might be it, since nobody else is here. We'll see. Great. Go ahead and start.
Thank you and good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The item before you is a conditional use permit for a planned residential development comprised of 12 multifamily units located at 2219 West Kootenai Street on 0.41 acres in an R1 3D multifamily residential with design review zone. The applicant has proposed to construct an apartment building on the subject property, which currently contains a single-family home that will be demolished. The surrounding area is comprised of a mix of single and multifamily developments, with a majority of the single-family houses located to the south and west, and predominantly multifamily development located to the north and east. The existing attached sidewalk along Kootenai Street will remain and will be improved with street trees. The proposal is supported by the development code and the comprehensive plan, as all setbacks and height requirements of the zone have been met. As proposed, the site is large enough to accommodate the use, as all yards, open spaces, pathways, parking, and landscape requirements have been met. The proposal incorporates an infill development within the Vista and Overland Activity Center that is compatible with the surrounding uses in the area and is in close proximity to transit and other alternative modes of transportation. The proposal is supported by the public testimony was received at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, in which concerns were expressed by neighbors regarding the site layout, specifically the proposed amount of parking spaces and the location of the solid waste enclosure. As was discussed at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, the proposal meets the required amount of off-street parking spaces, and the proposed location of the solid waste enclosure complies with all setbacks. Testimony was also received from Stacy Donahue, who later appealed the decision made by the commission. Ms. Donahue's grounds for appeal are summarized on your screen. She contended that the proposal does not align with the principles and policies within the development code and comprehensive plan regarding compatibility with its surroundings, mitigation of existing trees, and the project's lack of affordable housing. Further, Ms. Donahue requested a reasonable accommodation for the prior owner of the subject property, Corky Brown, with claims that he was a victim of unfair and predatory business practices based on price reductions and deadlines within the property sale contract. The request for reasonable accommodation was in order to delay the commission's decision on the PUD until said claims had been adjudicated. As detailed within the appeal memo, the city's stance on the matter remains that the private party ownership dispute is not relevant to the PUD approval criteria and does not give the commission authority to put the PUD application on hold, and that the decision made by the commission does not foreclose the appellant's right to seek litigation for this private dispute. In conclusion, the planning team recommends council deny the appeal and uphold the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to approve the planned unit development. And I will stand for questions.
Any questions?
I have one question.
Yeah.
It's a general question. Does an outdoor stairwell count towards the setback requirement, or is that not considered part of the building?
Madam Mayor, Commissioner, Councilmember Nash, an outdoor staircase would have to comply with setbacks.
Okay, and I have an update, Mr. Ertz, because Mr. Brown was not a party of record. We can't have you representing him. So you are able to speak if you're representing the appellant. I'm gonna need you to speak into the record. I'm gonna ask that you represent the appellant of record. Otherwise we won't be able to have you testify. I'm not having you
Can I just-
testify right now. You can just say into the record what you said from your seat. No, I
Or
think that
does
one
this
does. Yeah, that
Okay.
works.
So pursuant to 42 USC 3604 subpart F, I'd ask for a reasonable accommodation to allow Mr. Brown's participation in these proceedings. He was hospitalized. We didn't realize that he would be, he submitted the application. He's the previous property owner that's immediately adjacent to the site. And the only reason that he was unable to attend was both because of physical disabilities and also cognitive disabilities associated with his sustaining a stroke. And so I would ask for a reasonable accommodation to allow me to represent.
Did you deliver that request in writing prior to this meeting?
The Fair Housing Act doesn't require that I deliver it in writing. I didn't anticipate that you were going to try to procedurally preclude my client from participating in these proceedings.
Yeah, at this point, I'm sorry that your client's not doing well physically, is having health issues. He's not a party of record. If you are representing the appellant, you are able to speak for the appellant. Otherwise, I'm going to ask that the appellant come up to give the presentation.
I understand that the
The
appellant has
appellant's
declined
not
my
speaking.
representation. I'll reiterate that reasonable accommodation request.
Yeah,
thank you
I've
for-
got to hear from the appellant.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you got to be in the record.
I wasn't planning to say anything today. I have a job in Idaho judiciary, and so it's really just better if I'm not making arguments before any tribunal. And so I'm going to decline to make any arguments today. That's why I asked Corky's lawyer to be here, because Corky has been hospitalized for several months after his second stroke and a fall, where he was immobilized on the floor of his home for several days.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask, did you file the appeal?
I did file, yes, I filed the appeal on Corky's behalf.
And the name on the appeal is?
Yes.
Can I just?
Madam Mayor, council members, for the record, James Smith, Deputy City Attorney. Just a point of clarification on what I understand is a new request to this body to provide some accommodation by way of allowing counsel for Mr. Brown to add arguments to the record or to provide something that Mr. Brown was unable to provide before this point, and that this body, it's within this body's discretion to allow some offering there or some explanation of what arguments are missing or what they might add to the record so that the record is complete for council to make a decision. You've got the materials from staff and from the appellant, the written materials that were provided. So if there's anything new for this council to consider or anything that Mr. Brown was unable to provide as a result of a disability, then I think now would be a good time to invite that explanation.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
Could you just restate the offer to Ms. Donahue that you made for Mr. Brown's attorney to speak on her behalf?
Yes. The appellant, Ms. Donahue, can have an attorney speak on her behalf.
And I appreciate that, Mayor. My application states that it was on behalf of myself and Corky Brown. And so it would be very helpful if Corky's lawyer could speak on his behalf and make the arguments, because Corky can't be here himself.
Was
And so-
Corky a party of record? And is it typical that somebody that's not a party of record and wasn't granted what they were asking at the Planning and Zoning Commission would then be an appellant?
Madam Mayor, if I understand the proceedings to this point, Mr. Brown did not participate either through written comment or testimony. Ms. Donahue did participate and testified something to the effect that she was there to provide comment on behalf of the neighbor, but that the neighbor, Mr. Brown, had separate counsel. And so Ms. Donahue, it seems from the record, was not there in a representative capacity other than there to try to help a neighbor. So that maybe the council or Madam Mayor might want to invite them to clear that up if I got any of that wrong. But in terms of a representation capacity, it sounds like Mr. Brown was not a party of record, but is asking to participate or perhaps add some arguments. And I think it might help to allow at least a window on that to see what council might be missing, if anything, if there's any argument to add from what's already in the record.
If I can comment, I've really just been helping Corky through this process. He's been hospitalized for several months. I've really just been, trying to find him lawyers and representation and just help him through the process. This is really appeal that I filed, on his behalf. I've met and talked with him in the hospital several times, the various facility that he's been moved around. I've been in a lot of conversation with his sister, trying to help coordinate care and meet all the things that he has going on at the moment. And so it really is an appeal on Corky's behalf. So it would be, I would certainly appreciate it, and Corky would appreciate it if his lawyer could speak on his behalf here.
So then I will keep this narrow, given that we have documents from you already related to the appeal. Is there anything beyond what was provided in the appeal that this body should hear right now? And beyond, not a repeat of what was provided in written testimony.
$42 USC 3615, the Fair Housing Act's effect on state laws. Nothing in this subchapter shall be construed to invalidate or limit any state law or state or political subdivision of a state or any other jurisdiction which the subchapter shall be effective, that grants, guarantees, or protects the same rights as are granted by this subchapter. But any law of a state, a political subdivision, or other such jurisdiction that purports to require or permit any action that would be a discriminatory housing practice under this subchapter shall be to that extent invalid. That's germane to the instant back and forth as well. The Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution And the Fair Housing Act supersedes and allows my client's participation despite the fact that he's hospitalized and despite the fact that he has disabilities. And so to the degree that that's being limited right now by the qualifying language, Madam Mayor, I object. I pronounce my client's civil right under the Fair Housing Act. And to the degree that it's being limited in this proceeding is a violation of the Fair Housing Act.
Are you sharing information or?
Secondly, that's also consistent with U.S. Department of Justice's and the HUD opinion with respect to its November 10th, 2016 memorandum with respect to land use laws and implementation of the Fair Housing Act. This is germane to the instant inquiry with respect to the appeal by the Planning and Zoning Commission, because just as this body misapprehended its responsibility, its civil rights responsibilities under federal law, so too the Planning and Zoning Commission considered Corky's plight to be outside of the scope of its consideration. And the city of Boise has no means in its planning department for a person who's been victimized by predatory and discriminatory housing practices to seek redress from the city. And that's a problem at a policy level, and it's a problem as it relates to the city's practice of processing land use applications. And so my client would respectfully request that the city of Boise adopt such a procedure and get its staff civil rights training with respect to the Fair Housing Act. The only thing I would say above and beyond in the written record would be to give it some clarification. The original purchase price of the home was $600,000 after Corky had a veteran, by the way. After he had a stroke, the opportunity was taken to jam that down by about $175,000. After being pressured to go through with the real estate transaction, the pressure only existing presumably because the applicant knew that there would be no recourse, there would be no one to talk to at the city, which is a policy and practice of the city of Boise in turning a blind eye to civil rights violations in its land use decisions. Corky had a fall and requested a 5-week extension to move out under the, again, 42 USC 3604 subpart F, reasonable accommodations under the Fair Housing Act. 5 weeks extra time to move out so he could be there as his belongings that occupied the home that he lived in since the 70s on the bench. So he could be there. He has nobody in Idaho to help him other than neighbors. The applicant declined the reasonable accommodation request. Corky asked for 4 weeks' time because he was hospitalized. The applicant denied the reasonable accommodation request. 3 weeks' time, denied the reasonable accommodation request. 2 weeks' time, the request for extra time to be there for his personal belongings that have been there for decades, a veteran member of our community on the bench, denied the reasonable accommodation. 1 week extra time so Corky could be present as his sister and his niece flew in from Portland to make the deadline. The reasonable accommodation request was denied. This is not discreet. This is not outside of the city's purview. This is because the city of Boise maintains an active and ongoing policy and practice of see no evil with respect to the implementation of the federal law. But the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution, all guiding authority, the statute itself gives the Planning and Zoning Commission the authority to intervene and uphold Corky's right. And if I could have him here and show this body the immense generosity that exists the kindness that exists, I would. But I can't. I respectfully request a reasonable accommodation. I respectfully insist that as a matter of law and as a matter, an important law, the Fair Housing Act, Corky has a claim that this body can enforce, that this body should enforce. This is happening all over the city. I've invited members of the council to join me on Thursdays at 2 p.m. in eviction court. I haven't seen any of you there. This is what happens when it's a hands-off approach and a rubber stamp. Corky's going to be displaced. His civil rights have been violated. The city's in a position and indeed has an obligation. I beg of you to at least consider in your legislative capacity off of this procedure. Train your employees on the Fair Housing Act and land use decisions. There's a whole body of law that exists. Create a procedure whereby somebody that's being victimized in this way, to where the staff knows what to do in that circumstance, other than proclaim its own disinterest. You have a federal obligation to do that. With that, I thank you for the time and appreciate your service.
Okay, we will now hear from the applicant.
All right, thanks, Madam Mayor. Jeff Bauer, 601 West Bannock in Boise, here tonight on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Dennis did a great job summarizing the project as well as the arguments on appeal. We don't have much to add except to say that we fully agree with the staff report that the appeal should be denied. I do just want to put on the record that we agreed with Madam Mayor's analysis of the situation, that Mr. Brown isn't a party of record and that he should not be able to participate in this appeal for that reason, based on plain language in the Boise City Code that says you have to be a party of record to participate in an appeal. We'd also object to the new evidence that was added by Corky's counsel. Again, this is just for the record, but I found some of the testimony to be helpful to my client. To summarize, it sounds like Mr. Brown's counsel is acknowledged that he no longer lives on the property. He has vacated the premises, so there really is no reasonable accommodation that could be had at this point. So delaying the decision would be immaterial at this point. So that's a new argument that we're hearing for the first time tonight. So I wanted to respond to that, but otherwise the project meets all of the dimensional standards for the zone. The procedures the commission used followed LUPA and the Boise City Code to a T. And for all those reasons, we would ask you to deny the appeal. And I'd stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
has the landowner sued your client for defrauding them for elder abuse or filed a list pendants? Like, is there any legal proceeding that could interfere with what we're trying to do here that we don't know about?
Mayor McLean, Councilmember Bajent, no. And to be clear, the applicant in this case has owned this property since the inception of this application.
Got it. I guess the question is, has Mr. Brown sued your client or anybody in business with your client such that, you know, taking everything we just heard is true, there's a judgment that says this real estate deal was terrible, you need to go back on it, and then we've approved something that needs to be unwound? That's my question.
Mayor McLean, Councilmember Bajent, no.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have a question for the appellant. Is that appropriate?
No.
No, okay.
Madam Mayor, how long since this property was acquired and since the application was originally filed?
Mayor McLean, Councilmember Nash, I might have to confer with my client, but the property was purchased at the beginning of 2023, I believe, and the application was filed in the spring of 2023.
Further questions for the applicant? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to open up the public hearing. Is anybody here to testify on this? Do we have questions for staff? All right. We will now go into rebuttals. Jeff? All right. And with this, it's going to be limited to the applicant. So Mrs. Donahue, if you have anything to say, you may. All right. With that, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor. Make sure I have the right one. I move to deny the appeal in PUD 23-00025.
Second.
Discussion, please.
Madam Mayor, I have no doubt that there's a lot of sadness and tragedy and maybe even differing levels of sophistication among parties in a real estate transaction. I think that happens all the time. And I am impressed that Mr. Brown has neighbors who, in addition to looking out for him, I think probably really love and care about him. And I'm grateful for that. We can't deny an applicant their development rights as a matter of right on the ground that somebody alleges a civil transgression. The place for that is the courts. And, you know, a judge can say this transaction needs to be put on hold, or a judge can say there's a dispute about the ownership of the property because of the way that the deal went down. But we can't take someone's allegation that that happened and use that unproven thing to do perform a judicial function like a court and deny people rights. It's not in our, Mr. Ertz is right, it's not in our procedures because it's just not something that city councils and planning and zoning commissions do. So there is an avenue for redress or the kind of remedy or the kind of final decision-making that you're looking for, but I'm sorry, it's not the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission. It's in the Idaho State Courts. So that was the heart of the appeal, that there was a legal error or that there was an abusive process or that the law was applied wrong. And I just don't think that's correct. So under our appeal standard, the only question is, does this application comply with our criteria? And I agree with the Planning and Zoning Commission that it does.
Madam Mayor, I might just add a couple more things. I agree with everything that Council President Pro Tem Bajent said. If you read through the transcript of the Planning and Zoning meeting, you can see that this issue was actually discussed during that meeting. In fact, I believe James was maybe the one who spoke at the meeting or offered some insight as far as the legality and if we could be considering that or not. All this conversation has happened once before in the Planning and Zoning Commission. There really, other than a couple of small new things, really wasn't introduced. That's why I'm supporting the motion. I don't agree that our staff holds their hands up and says that they don't care. I will put that on the record. I was in a meeting earlier today about tenant protections. We were doing outreach to service providers. It's a really productive meeting. Our service providers were really grateful that we were extending those tenant protections. So I believe our staff really does look into these things really well. And so I do disagree with that comment, but I do agree with the motion.
Anything further?
All right, clerk, will you call the roll? Halliburton,
Yes.
Haney Keith,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
All right, thank you. Next, we're going to go to the appeal of CUP 2347 at 812 Brumbach Street. So we've got Matt Dennis. Welcome back, Matt. The appellant and the applicant are both Amon Park. This is probably written wrong.
Madam Mayor. Yeah.
John Michael was just saying no. Okay, all right. So the applicant and the appellant are the same person. You don't get 2 times to speak. You get to speak once. Okay. I see Nina here. Welcome, Eric, you're speaking as well. And then is anybody from the public here on this topic? Great. So we're going to hear from the city. We're going to hear from the appellant applicant. We will then hear from the north end. And then we'll take questions as we go. Then I'm going to close it after making sure that nobody has showed up to testify on this one. And you've got something to say.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I am going to recuse myself from this one. The owners are close friends of mine. They've been going through this process for several years now. There's a chance that during that time, I may have heard information, about the application, and I just out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to recuse myself.
Great, thanks. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The item before you is a conditional use permit for a parking reduction for a single-family home located at 812 West Brumback Street in an R1CH, single-family residential with historic overlay zone. The proposed parking reduction is being requested in anticipation of a conversion of an existing detached garage into a ground level studio ADU. The applicant had originally received approval for a 2-story ground level garage with a second level ADU, but decided to repurpose the existing garage into living space, which would avoid demolition, but would necessitate a parking reduction of the 2 required off-street parking spaces. Planning staff had recommended approval of the parking reduction because the applicant had provided information regarding the property's adequate access to a relatively comprehensive network of alternative transportation with adjacent infrastructure suited for walking, biking, and transit. The applicant also provided a parking study demonstrating the amount of available on-street parking spaces at varying times of the day and week. The submitted parking study demonstrates that there is a sufficient amount of on-street parking throughout the day and week to support the reduction. At the October 2nd, 2023 Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, the commission approved the parking reduction with a modification of planning staff's recommended reduction of 2 spaces to 1 space, as detailed within the appeal memo. The commission supported its decision by referring to the community outreach and other research that occurred over the last few years leading to the implementation of the modern zoning code, referencing and acknowledging it as a guiding principle which sets precedent for requiring 1 off-street parking space for single-family homes in the future. On October 12th, 2023, the commission's decision was appealed with the following grounds shown on the left of your screen. The cited ground does not constitute an error made by the commission as summarized on the right of your screen. In conclusion, the planning team recommends council deny the appeal and uphold the approval made by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I will stand for questions.
This one has some really convoluted history, so I want to try to make sure I have it right and get that on the table for the rest of it, because it gets real rabbit holey real fast. There was an application to convert an existing structure into an ADU, but the entire property had as a requirement 2 off-street parking places. So far, so good. You're nodding. Okay. Then the application changed because the applicant wanted to convert, either build a new structure or use the lower portion of that accessory structure as a living space, which would eliminate parking that's possible inside the structure. So now you've got a conflict with off-street parking because one of the off-street spaces would be inside the structure, but it's gone now because that's going to be living space. Like, so far, so good. Okay. But back when everybody was talking about that initial draft, staff's recommendation was based on the transportation network, the walkability of the neighborhood, et cetera, a conditional use, an approvable conditional use would be no parking for this property at all, correct? And now we have an appeal from the Planning and Zoning Commission where the Planning and Zoning Commission concluded that reducing it to 1 was fine, but going to no off-street parking on this site was not supported as a conditioned use because of the policies in our now adopted new zoning code. Is that right? That's the part that seems confusing. And if it's not right, please tell me.
Madam Mayor, Commissioner Bajan, I think the majority of that was correct. I would be a little cautious to refer to the modern zoning code as the decision-making policy statute, more so as a guiding principle, as I had mentioned earlier, and really referencing the amount of input, community outreach, research that had gone into the, leading up to the adoption of the modern zoning code.
Okay, so a better way to put it is, thank you, yes, that the policies reflected in that code as expressed by the community leading up to it guided the Planning and Zoning Commission to conclude that although there'd been discussion about no parking, one off-street parking space was still required here.
Madam Mayor, Commissioner Bajan, I would say that that's accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor. I would love to just clarify, is it, I understand some of us have two codes in our mind. So if I'm just to clarify, the code that is recently sunsetted would have required 2 parking spots for the primary dwelling. And the new code would require 1 parking spot for the primary dwelling. Is that accurate?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Stead, that's correct.
Okay, and then, and with this application where the deciding code is the recently sunsetted code, is that right? The 2.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Stead, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor. My question is, do you have a satellite view of the property in question? Maybe that one, yeah. So I'm looking at the satellite view. So the area at the north side of the property, why can't that be considered off-street parking? That's just north of the detached garage.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, the reason why the existing parking pad, what's essentially functioning as a parking pad, would not constitute compliant parking is because the setback from the existing structure to the property line, to the northern property line, adjacent to the alley, would not fit a two standard 9x20 spaces. Outside of, in addition to having 22 feet of backup space, including the alley.
How much space do you think we would need to consider those available parking? Like, it sounds like I heard a lot of numbers thrown around. That seems like a rather large area to be able to consider off-street parking into an alleyway.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, city code requires 22 feet of backup space from the edge of the parking space. So if the parking space, the surface parking north of the existing detached garage on site on the subject property, you need a minimum of 22 feet. My apologies, 20 feet for a standard length of a car, in addition to 22 feet of backup space, including the alley. So the alley, from what I can tell, is about 13 feet wide, which means an additional 9 feet of backup space would have to be on the subject property, on top of the 20 feet for the standard car length. So to answer your question, the setback from the existing structure to the northern property line would need to be about 29 feet.
And do we know how many feet it is?
From my calculations, it's about 20 feet from the edge of the structure to the northern property line.
So we're 9 feet short.
Correct.
Anything further? All right, thank you. Now we'll hear from John Michael Sharp.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having us today. My husband and I live in a home that was built in 1896 by a father and son in the north end. I've owned the home since 2006, and we've been lovingly renovating it since 2011. We've been attempting to build an ADU now for 3 years. As mentioned, we originally filed for permits upon city staff recommendation that would have been a tear down of the existing garage. We won't call it historic. We're not actually sure when the garage was built. We think sometime in 1910s or 20s. It was not built for cars. We have been able to renovate it to fit one small car. We originally filed for permits that would demolish the existing structure to build a 2-story. It wasn't what we actually wanted, but it was the path of least resistance. After 2 years of trying to build said structure, we had 3 canceled builders, one after signing a contract and returning a deposit. Market forces changing. And what was originally supposed to be a small ADU project turned into a $400,000 ADU. We began to question why we were tearing it down to build a 2-story structure. And I want to tell that narrative a little bit today because some of it was missing from the record of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Unfortunately, when that date was set for the hearing, Brett and I were already scheduled on an international flight. We're unable to attend. The proposed budget, there's 3 reasons why we didn't proceed with the original plans. One was cost. The proposed budget for conversion, adaptive reuse conversion, will be $180,000. The delta there, $220,000, is basically the cost passed to the owner to provide for a box to provide cars. The same livable space, whether we do an adaptive reuse conversion of the garage or we did the 2-story structure. The second reason we did not proceed with our former permits is in the transcript. The nature of the character of the north end is adaptive reuse. We didn't want to build a towering 2-story structure in our backyard that would sort of loom over our backyard and look into our neighbors' properties. The existing garage is well built. We wanted to repurpose it. But the third, which was not yet listed for the record, is we're building this not as an Airbnb, but primarily to house our family when they come to visit and friends, and from time to time donate this space to nonprofits like Valley, Idaho, or the Shakespeare Festival to house visiting artists. Accessibility, a 2nd floor unit doesn't work for Brett's father who's had a stroke and struggles with stairs, or my father who has mobility issues. So in the end, we decided, why are we building a $400,000 2-story structure with a living unit on top when the only purpose was to appease the need to maintain parking? Upon city staff recommendation, we pivoted to an adaptive reuse. I want to point out that the city staff was incredibly adaptive, creative, in helping us think through this process. We literally have thrown almost every idea at it. I laugh because your questions are fantastic, Councilmember Nash. We have looked at those numbers from every single way. How do you fit with the 20 feet of space we have behind the existing garage? Why could we not fit a car there? We have worked with the city staff exhaustively, and we were led by the staff to believe that our only option was to ask of a parking reduction from 2 to 0 of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It was on the consent agenda, and we did all the proper paperwork, the public meeting, the parking report as mentioned by the city staff. In the end, it was denied or changed to 1 parking spot. We're maintaining still an alley loaded car. The reason we actually are appearing here today is there's no way to make 1 parking spot work. But we're not just appealing on our own behalf. As I walk the North End and West End, East End daily, there are literally thousands of homes like ours in Boise, for which the modern zoning code has not yet taken into account. How do you have a home that was built in 1896 prior to modern standards? How can you park a car? We'd like to do so safely, legally, and within the city code. Currently, the city code, and I'd like to show 2 potential slides, and I'm not sure if that works. One is a quick slide of what compliant parking would look like. Are you able to help with this, Matt? Thank you. It's all right, no problem. The first is a quick slide of what, to your question, Councilmember Nash, what compliant parking would look like per city code. It requires a 90-degree turn off of the alley. So per the Planning and Zoning Commission decision, we only have to require 1 parking spot. This is what it would look like. It's a 10 by 20 foot spot. That's the size of an extended cab pickup truck, not a compact car as frequently used by us or members in the North End. In addition, it has to be a 90-degree turn. And then as pointed out by the city staff, Mr. Dennis, you have to back up in a straight 22 feet. I assure you, we tried every single option with the city staff. Matt, if you could progress to the second slide. This is what we would love to see in an idealized version. And we bring this to this body, the city council, to say, what does it look like for homes like us? Do you have the second slide? If we were to actually look at either whether it be the code or older homes such as ours, how might we be able to fit this one car into such a space that has plenty of room? What does angled parking look like? Alley loaded angled parking. What does a compact stall look like? Currently, code does not allow for compact stalls in our neighborhood. Why currently code does not allow for angled parking? If you see this diagram put together by our architect, if we were able to pull in at an angle and a compact stall, we would then be able to achieve 22 feet of backup. The only variance we might have to ask is for a 1 foot incursion into the 3 foot setback up against the fence adjacent to our neighbor. This is not an egress. This is not a walkway. This is not a gate. So more the question for the council today is the modern zoning code update was immense in many respects, but I think there are still those of us left behind that are seeking to live in the aspirations and the ideals of the code: urban infill, sustainable building projects, adaptive reuse. But currently, after 3 years of adamant trying and over $10,000 in fees, we still are not able to build an ADU. I yield for questions.
What kind of car do you drive?
Subaru Outback.
It's a little long, but okay.
Other questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody here from the public to testify on this one? Questions for staff? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the, oh, sorry, so sorry. Yeah, I knew you were here. Come on up, North End Neighborhood Association.
Pull up that one picture that you have that's in the packet that shows their Subaru parked in the stall. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Eric Hagan. I live at 809 North 18th Street in North End. I'm the North End president and the planning and zoning chair. I did speak obviously at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing because what this project was asking for, even though it said it was a parking reduction, staff had recommended a complete parking elimination. And if there's one thing that I get a lot of emails about in the North End from our neighbors, it's about parking, especially around Hyde Park, around Camel's Back Park. And with that in mind, why would the city be pushing for a complete parking elimination? The old code and the new code both require parking for residential lots.
Is that the wrong side?
Yeah, no, it's from your packet. And so my question is, when we're looking at codes, as you guys know, I'm an architect. I'm reviewing building codes, zoning codes all the time. When we're reviewing codes, there's two rules of thumb that we always find. When we come to a fractional number of occupants, number of parking stalls, you get a fraction, whether it's 1/10, 50%, or 75%, you round up because you can't have a half of a parking spot. You can't have a fractional one. The other thing that we look at when we're faced with different code compliance paths is which is the more stringent one, which one gives us the better outcome. And oh, there, thank you, Matt. So when we look at that, what is more stringent? Being able to provide a parking stall that may not be totally 100% compliant in the eyes of PDS, Planning and Development Services, or is total elimination of parking more stringent, more of a burden to the neighborhood? It's been proposed that eliminating parking for this property, which has one existing residence on it, they're trying to add an ADU, has no impact to the neighborhood. But I would counter that by saying forcing people to park on the street has an effect on the neighborhood. Just last week, I was walking 8th and 9th in Brumback with ACHD Commissioner Miranda Gold. And we were there with about a dozen neighbors of that area. And what were we discussing? We were discussing on-street parking. We were discussing access of automobiles, pedestrian safety, bicycle safety. You can pull up my one now. Thanks, Matt. This subject site is not a typical width lot in the neighborhood. It's a little bit awkward in the sense that it's on east-west blocks rather than north-south blocks. The width of the lot is, I believe, 27 feet, about 26, 27 feet. So that precludes what happens a lot at times in the neighborhood where you have a garage on the side and you have side-loaded parking. So the existing garage that's on their lot is basically taking up the whole back of that lot. And what you see before you is the subject property in the image in the bottom right. And I literally just spent about 2 minutes on Google Earth panning around the neighborhood. And all those images are cars parked in the backyards off valleys within a block radius of their property. And you can see there's some that are perpendicular. There are some that are parallel, and there's some that are angled. As we've been working together, I've been working with Mr. Brett Perry, Mr. Shirt, and Mr. Park on these, how to address this, and talking to Matt Dennis on different options. And we just keep running up to the roadblock of, all right, you're going to require one parking stall, but you're only going to force it to be in one direction, and the existing conditions don't accommodate that. Why can't we do angled parking? Why can't we consider it a compact stall? Why can't we do parallel parking? And all of those were shot down because they were unsafe. I believe that's the word that you used. A 22-foot backup space for a compact stall is pretty excessive. Compact stall is 7.5 feet by 15 feet. A typical stall is 9 by 20. Ford F-150 is 350 feet. Or sorry, an Ford F-350 is about 20 feet long. Typical car like a Subaru SUV is maybe about 17 or 18 feet. So when you're looking at 22 feet of backup space, why is that applied to both compact and standard stalls? Can you go to the next slide, please? Can I control it with this? Look at that.
Oh, yeah,
Awesome.
you can do it yourself.
I know. Awesome. I just pulled a couple things from the appeal and from the code. The first section is basically going over why is this appeal? What should you as city council consider? And what I'd like to point out is what I have highlighted is that the original decision made by planning and zoning staff and commission disregarded a lot of facts that were available to them. They didn't consider what else is going on in the neighborhood. They didn't consider what the other code requirements are. They didn't look at other ways to go about it. Staff pushed the zero parking policy or the zero parking recommendation. And when we got up, Nina got up, I got up, and I said that zero parking policy is not compliant with the code. Why don't we look into options? The solution was to, well, just provide one parking stall. But as you've seen, one parking stall doesn't meet the requirements of the code. So the decision was not supported by substantial evidence. When we're looking at lots in the neighborhood, there's a whole section on non-conforming uses, non-conforming parcels, non-conforming this, that, and the other thing. Parking is a use in the zoning code, and the existing lot, you can park cars in front of it, as you saw in that picture. The existing lot is parking cars in there. They're non-conforming parking stalls. So there's existing non-conforming parking stalls. So my question there is almost like, well, why are we even here? Why wasn't this just listed as a non-conforming existing parking stall to remain? Then we could go on to the approvals for building permit and get the project built. The code allows for alternative compliance. The code also allows for the director of planning to look into alternative means and methods. Waiver, that's the word I was looking for earlier. The planning director may grant a waiver based on the following findings. It's not feasible due to existing development circumstances regarding the property, yada, 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 goes on and on. The zoning code does also allow for angled parking. Why this is not allowed off of the alley, I don't know. I couldn't find in the code where it said it wasn't allowed, but the code does provide for angled parking. And so there's different degrees of angled parking from parallel, which is what the 0 is, all the way up to 90 degrees. We've been able to show that we could fit a compact stall if we angled it at 45 degrees. It'd be a little bit off from the 30-degree angle that's shown in there. Off-street and parking loading standards, alley loaded and parking structures may encroach into rear or interior side setbacks for the zone. I'm bringing this up because it's been quoted to me several times about the or in that sentence, rear or interior side setbacks. So what we've proposed, or what Eamon Park has proposed, is a parking spot that's angled, that's in front, that is within the rear setback and the side yard setback. Now, elsewhere on that page, I've also highlighted sections where there's an ands and ors. And again, when we're reviewing code requirements, when we're reviewing building codes, zoning codes, if there's an and or an or requirement, it is most typically listed in bullet form or itemized numbers there. If it's not, it's generally considered non-inclusionary. So it doesn't have to be and or. You could do one, the other, both, or neither. That's the general use of that language in the building code when it comes to architecture and design. The zoning code also allows for parking side yards that do not abut a street for detached family residential uses in an R1C within up to the 3-foot landscaping and screening area. And that's what Eamon Park had shown in his plan, is a 3-foot. Typically the building setbacks in the north end are 5 feet. The driveways are allowed to go through the front yard and the side yard. And that's what I have highlighted later on. There it's also an and. So there it's not inclusionary, it's not exclusionary. It's just saying it can do one or the other or both. With that in mind, I just took Eamon's plan and I drafted over it a couple different options. So in the upper left-hand corner, number 1 is the existing non-conforming to remain. That is what I feel it should have been considered, and that's what should have been allowed to go through for their building permit. It's existing parking. There are already parking cars there, just like everyone else in the north end. They're going to continue to park cars there, regardless of what happens with planning and zoning or this hearing tonight. They're going to continue to park cars there. You can say it's not allowed, but they're going to continue to park cars there. So that's the existing condition to remain. If we look at it from an alternative point of view, with a compact stall, with a reasonable compact stall backup space of 2 feet more than the compact stall length, which is the rule that's applied to the standard stall and backup space, you can fit 2 compact stalls plus a 17-foot backup space. That is not written in the code, so that is just an option, but it is another option. The angled parking stall that Eamon Park showed shows a compact stall with 22 feet of backup space that they can make work. But who backs straight up out of their garage into an alley or into a street, perpendicular, diagonal, parallel, whatever? No one does. You back up, you turn the wheel as you're backing up. That's the true 22 feet of space. That is what's shown in option 4. And that is basically what I feel is compliant with the current code. If you guys can't find your way to amend the approval, which by the way, didn't specify what kind of parking stall it had to be. It didn't say it had to be standard stall with 22 feet of backup space. It just said it had to provide 1 parking stall. So I feel it's within your authority to amend that approval to state that a compact stall is allowed, or to state that the 22 feet of backup space could go at an angle or go as you turn the wheel. Or you could amend it to say the existing non-conforming parking stalls to remain can remain and will cover the requirements for parking. Just let me refer to my notes here if I missed anything. I think that pretty much covers everything I had in there. I appreciate your time listening to me tonight. It's not for any questions.
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
And now, anybody here to testify? All right, nobody is. I'm going to imagine you don't need a rebuttal, but you're welcome to rebut or close.
Only to say that we've partnered greatly with Nina. We think there's a lot of solutions here. We support everything that Nina just presented on our behalf, not just for us, but we think this is actually an essential amendment to the code to allow for more homes in the north end, west end, east end to be able to satisfy the aspirations of the modern zoning code and build more ADUs. Thank you.
I'm certainly going to go home and measure the area behind my garage. Probably not tonight, but some point very soon. I'm now very curious. All right, any questions for staff?
I have a question, Madam Mayor. Of the slides that we were just shown of those possible parking configurations, does staff have any opinions on any of those proposals?
I'm going to actually ask, I don't want staff to answer that question. This is before us because council needs to make a decision on this.
Okay.
And council has the ability to, take into account the record that was provided, the code that exists, the new suggestions and potential new findings that could be added to a decision tonight. And that's why it's before council rather than staff having made this decision themselves.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
I had a question for staff. Could you refresh our memory about what the modern zoning code says in regards to ADU parking? I've been sorting through 620 pages, but if you've got it off the top of your head, I'd take it.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, the modern zoning code requires one off-street parking space for single-family homes and no additional parking spaces for ADUs.
Right.
To my best knowledge, that's correct.
So there is no parking requirement if you put in an ADU.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, that's correct.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, I will add refocusing onto the code in which this application was applied under. Under this code, the previous code, single-family homes are required 2 off-street parking spaces. ADUs with 2 bedrooms require an additional parking space totaling 3. ADUs with less than 2 bedrooms required 0, no additional parking space beyond those 2 required standard for the home.
No further questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing.
Madam Mayor, I would move to grant the appeal in CUP 2347.
Second.
You got some seconds? All right, go ahead.
Sounds like with that number of seconds, I don't know if I need to talk, but this application initially supported under the old code, no parking. The staff's recommendation was that a conditional use would be appropriate for no additional parking on this site. And then the applicant shrank the scale and the size of the project substantially. And somehow what emerged was a requirement that it needs at least some parking. So something went haywire in the conversation. And if you read the planning and zoning transcript, you can see what happened. Through no fault of their own, it's really tough, like keeping 2 codes in your head. But they made a mistake and they stopped thinking about the old code and the conditional use test that's applicable there. And they started thinking about the new code. So instead of applying the conditional use test from the old code, which would have counseled parking reductions in this case, or even elimination, what the Planning and Zoning Commission did was look at the default rule in the new code, which says, well, 1 parking space is required, and then applied that default rule from the new code to a conditional use test in the old code. And that's the wrong procedure. It's not the city law and it exceeds their discretion. So they applied the wrong set of rules. as we go in and look to, what to do with this, I apologize. I'm going to ask the seconders in a moment if they consent to reverse and modify. That's what I intended to say. We have to go back to the conditional use record. And the conditional use record here supports a reduction or elimination of parking because of the walkability, the nature of the use in the neighborhood, all of the factors that you talked about briefly in your presentation. So I would reverse and modify to eliminate the parking requirements at 812 West Brownback Street.
Second.
I'll second.
God.
The seconders concur, correct?
Yes.
Great. All right. Further discussion?
Madam Mayor, if I may, I had one additional comment because you could tell that planning and zoning was looking for guidance from council. They kicked this up to council, was said a number of times. The concern in the Planning and Zoning Commission was that they were setting a precedent. And to the extent that we can give policy direction here, we don't set precedents. We look at every application on its individual merit, particularly in a conditional use application. So each application comes and we look at it on the facts and law in that case. So the policy direction I would give is please don't think about setting a precedent. Please think about each application as it comes. And then the second piece of guidance is, don't worry, there'll be less of these as the old code goes away.
All right. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Haney,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
No.
Bajent,
Yes.
4 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
All right, we're gonna go, you were the group for the last one, correct? Is anybody here to testify from the public on this item? Is anybody online? All right, we're gonna not take a break, but we're just gonna get this done. So we've got Jesse. Hi, Jesse. For the city, she'll present. Stephanie, you're presenting for the applicant. We don't expect the neighborhood association here. I haven't seen Richard. Nobody from the public is here, so we'll go ahead and jump in.
Good evening again, Madam Mayor and council members. The item before you is CAR 2318 and SUB 2336, which is a modification to a development agreement to update the scope of a project and concept plan for a planned residential development comprised of 296 multifamily and 3 single-family units, as well as a preliminary and final plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 5 buildable and 2 common lots on 11.5 acres in the R3D DA zone and a C2D DA zone. The project was approved in 2022 on approximately 9.5 acres with a comprehensive plan amendment to change the land use from compact to high density, a rezone from R1A to R3D DA, a PUD for 224 multifamily and 3 single-family homes, and a preliminary plat. Since the approval, the applicant has acquired the 2-acre parcel to the west as shown on the screen and has submitted revised plans to incorporate that parcel into the development. The proposed DA modification does not modify any previous conditions or requirements of the DA, but does modify the site plan to allow for buildings to be closer to State Street and provide density along the transit corridor and multi-use pathway. Additionally, there are enhanced pedestrian connections shown in yellow on the pathway and throughout the development. The applicant has also proposed detached sidewalks along Duncan Lane, whereas attached were approved with the original application. The project is proposed to maintain the Ulmer Lane extension as well as the extension of Sloan Street. At the planning and zoning meeting, discussion focused primarily on traffic and safety, and the commission found that retaining the Sloan Street access for public use allowed for more connectivity and was in line with the goals of the comprehensive plan. As outlined in your project report, the preliminary and final plat for West Lock Village subdivision reflect these modifications and as conditioned meet all of these subdivision design standards. And in conclusion, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends approval, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Madam Mayor, I did have a couple of questions.
Sure.
I think in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there was talk about the traffic light across the street on, what street is it? Is it Ulmer? Ulmer. And that is still in ACHD's 5-year work plan. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, council members, there was discussion on that, and I believe that the applicant can provide a little bit more clarity, but they have been working with ACHD closely in order to install that light. But I believe because there was some question on timing, it was not included in that 5-year work plan. However, it's still in the plans.
Thank you. And this might also be a question that you all can answer, but I'll put it out there now just so you can prepare it. And if you have anything else. I remember when this came to us last time, there was a lot of discussion about the traffic light there. And the issue was that it was going to have to encroach into some of the church's parking space across the street to actually get it in there with the development. At that time, I believe that we asked both applicant and staff to go back to ACHD and request that ACHD work with that church to try to get the traffic light there. I'm curious if we know if there's been any follow-up on that particular discussion. It was like 2 years ago, so.
Yes, Madam Mayor, council members, I know that there has been discussion, but I also know that from comments that ACHD has provided to the city about this development, there wasn't any direct mention of that. So I think the applicant would be better able to expand on that.
Great. And then just one final question, if I might. One of the things that's nice about this development and the acquisition of this additional property is it actually creates an additional section of pathway along State Street to provide a greater connection to a little bit further down the road. I couldn't tell just by looking at the map. I know it extends all the way to Duncan. I can't tell if it extends all the way west to Gardner Lane or if it cuts short from there.
Madam Mayor, council members, as shown on the screen, the proposed plan does extend all the way through the subject property or along the subject property, excuse me. So there are some other
But that property line,
parcels.
does it go all the way to Gardner Street? I think it cuts short just a little bit.
Madam Mayor, council members, yes, this would be a better slide to show that. So upon redevelopment of that property to the west, the former Friends Whitty property, there would be an additional condition for that development to match with the State Street multi-use pathway that's proposed in this development.
All right, that's all I needed. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from the applicant. I think addressing some of the council president's
absolutely.
questions is probably the best way to go.
Of
Thanks.
course. Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council, Stephanie Hopkins, 5725 North Discovery Way in Boise. I'll just address comments because staff did such a great job summarizing our request. So the light, we initially our client was coordinating with the property owner, the church, as well as the business park. To the south, they weren't able to come to an agreement with the church. So the traffic engineer actually redesigned the light to be just on the business park's property. They're currently in talks with them in finalizing agreements. So that's super close to being finalized. The Ulmer Lane extension is not in ACHD's 5-year work plan, but we have been working with them on a cooperative development agreement, which is very close to being finalized, basically allowing our client or the developer to cooperate with them on financing for it. So they've been working with Capital City Development Corporation on that as well. And then I think your other question, remind me if there was another one. Did I catch them both?
I think you got it.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you. Are there any other questions that I might be able to?
Any other questions?
Okay.
And just to be clear, you're in agreement with the terms and
Yes,
conditions.
we're
of
in agreement with the
report?
staff report
Great,
conditions.
thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Anybody else here to testify? Any further questions for staff? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of SUB 23-36 and CAR 23-18.
Second.
Just a couple quick comments on there. I actually think it's really great that you got that additional piece of property. It lets us build out a network a little bit quicker. It allows us to address some of those pedestrian concerns. I really appreciate you going the extra mile and doing that. I know that we kind of had hit a dead end a little bit with the church. And so again, I appreciate you working with the business park across the street to explore that light. That was a big concern of the neighborhood. And I think that with this additional property, we actually end up getting a better product in a really important place, and just appreciate all the work that's been done on it.
All right, clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton.
Yes.
Haney-Keith.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
Stead.
Yes.
Willetts.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.